Welcome to the Untangling Web3 podcast, your go-to hub to learn insights and the latest developments in the wild and wonderful world of Web3. I'm Alec Burns.
And I'm Jack Davis. Tune in each week as we navigate and explore the rapidly emerging landscape of the Web3 technologies, projects, and ideas that are shaping the future of the internet.
We'll be talking to the best and brightest in the industry to keep uncovering insights,
so that hopefully we can all learn together on our journey to untangle Web3. Welcome to the first episode of the Untangling Web3 podcast. I am Jack Davis. I am a researcher in blockchain. I've been working in the field around 5 years.
And I'm Alec Burns, and I've had an interest in disruptive technology for quite a while now. I've been a researcher both academically and industrially, and more recently I've moved into the world of product. And let's not forget our behind-the-scenes producer, Emma. And she's also the filter and the one that keeps us on track. And he's doing a lot of hard work in the background. We also have ChatGPT as well. That's quite exciting, isn't it, Jack?
Yeah, Emma and ChatGPT making us look good. And hopefully ChatGPT will be providing all the insights instead of us, hopefully.
I mean, I think we need it. There's a lot of buzz around ChatGPT. I think a lot of it is justified and some of it's not so justified. Maybe a future episode about that.
Yeah, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But how are you, Alec? Are you excited for this? I know I am.
I'm good. I know we've wanted to do this for a while. This is very exciting. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. And I think we're both going to learn a lot. And hopefully the people that are listening, not just my mom, are going to learn a lot as well.
Yeah, this is new territory for us. Maybe we should explain a little bit about the podcast and what the purpose of it is. My thinking here is this is a great way for us to learn a little bit about Web3, because I think it's safe to say we work in the space, but we're not necessarily experts, right?
Yeah, it's definitely true. And I think I was telling you about this, Jack, before the episode is I speak to my mom on a weekly basis, and she asks me how work is going often. And sometimes she asks me what I actually do. And I've worked in the space now for 2 years effectively, and she still has no idea what I do. And I think it's less a reflection on her, maybe more reflection on me specifically, or even the industry itself. It's quite complicated to explain what Web3 is. I'm sure you've had the same experience, but there's a lot of people that are very interested, but there's an extremely high barrier to entry. And I'm hoping that this podcast can, help demystify some of the things that are going on out there. And me and you certainly aren't like the kind of the full experts on this. So I'm hoping that we learn a lot together during this.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there who get, on the first part of the learning curve and feel like they're experts. And I think we're over that first hump, and we're now experiencing that trough of realizing how little you really know about everything. So yeah, I think us learning more about Web3 and understanding it together is one of the main goals. And yeah, as you say, just making it a little bit more accessible, I think would be great. So hopefully that's what we'll achieve, but only time will tell, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, should we kick it off then? Should we try and define what Web3 is?
Sure. Do you want to go first?
Okay,
bite the bullet?
I'll go first. So, I mean, I think I want to start with a caveat that Web3 is not fully defined. It's a vision right now. So, the kind of the definition may vary from person to person, and that's kind of saved me a little bit. And now I will try and define it. So in my mind, Web3 is effectively the next generation internet with a focus on, I guess, the peer-to-peer economy, and specifically around the idea of user empowerment using blockchain technology, both the technology and the principles. So it kind of focuses on security, transparency, and really importantly around more trusted interactions. And I think we'll come on to that a bit later, but that is really a key concept of it. So that's my two-line summary, Jack. Can you give it a go?
Very concise. I think I would say Web3 is really this new kind of phase of the internet. It's an evolution of the internet, Web 1, Web 2 to Web 3. And it's all about, as you say, peer-to-peer interactions. It's changing the way we interact online, going through fewer third parties, being less reliant on the big kind of social media giants or internet, .com conglomerates, and being able to transact a little bit more freely and have more ownership over our data, more control over our data, who sees what and when. I think that's at the core of it. And it's a very technologically led thing. So we'll talk about the technologies later, but I think the core of it is around this peer-to-peer idea, I think.
Yeah, I think, we're quite aligned on that. Whether, my mom would understand those definitions, I do not know, but hopefully we'll unpack it a bit further throughout the episode and maybe rely on ChatGPT to help define it for her. But, I think to give it more context, obviously, Web3, this is potentially the third iteration of the web. It might help to define some of the earlier versions. So we'll start with Web 1. This was, in my mind, like particularly, it was called the static web. So there was it was very focused on like limited interactions. The focus was on information consumption. It was read only. So like I say, limited interactiveness. Effectively, companies created, hosted, and published pages that people would try to get on, sometimes quite laboriously, to find information. And it was very distributed. And I guess there was a lot of speculation and hype around that. People thought there was a lot of value in that. And then there was the .com crash that maybe we'll come on to in a bit. Jack.
Yeah, you're already kind of touching on some parallels, which maybe we're seeing happen again. History repeats itself in Web3. But Web 1 was very much the kind of pioneering age of the internet. And the key core idea was this, idea of disseminating information. How can we get people all over the world to interact with one another, use computers to share information more efficiently than we could before with paper-based analog systems. So that was kind of the idea, was spreading and sharing information for one another. And then obviously if we get onto Web 2, that's the kind of second phase of the internet where things changed a little bit and things went from a very distributed system into a slightly more centralized playing field where you have these very large players who tend to be controlling a lot of what we do online.
Yeah, and you started to talk about that. So if Web 1 was the static web, a lot of people refer to Web 2 as the dynamic web. So there was far more focus on interactiveness, collaboration, user-generated content. It was all around personal user experience and user kind of focused abilities. And this kind of led to, I guess, the perfect examples are the social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, all these kind of centralized gatekeepers that focused on user experience. And the reason they did this was to draw users in so that the users became the commodity. That classic line that if you're using a service that's free, then you are the product. And that is the case. And this led to, a lot of issues around privacy, control, and, the user power aspect is something we'll touch on quite heavily with the Web3 definition. Yeah,
and I think it's fair to say that people for our age, that's the web we grew up with, right? That's all we've ever known until very, very recently was the web being this way of communicating with people, social media dominated, user generated content being our tweets, our photos on Instagram, our friend networks on Facebook and things like that, and all that data, until relatively recently, and we started seeing various documentaries come out. We had the Cambridge Analytica kind of scandal going on. That's the first time I really realized all this stuff we've been doing online this whole time is actually this data is being aggregated and collected and used in ways that we wouldn't necessarily be happy with behind closed doors, right? So I think it's interesting being of that generation where we're seeing this is the first phase we've seen in the web, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like I say, the Cambridge Analytica scandal was kind of opened a lot of people's eyes around like data ownership. You think 5-10 years ago, most people, including me, I wouldn't really care about data ownership. I think, Facebook, they might see the post that I put out there. Does that really matter? But then you see the real impact of them having access and control over all of this data. And I think, some of the surveys and questionnaires they put out after that scandal, people were very unhappy. It was like 80% plus of people were very unhappy that data was being used in that way. But in the same sense, when you ask them further details about would they move from the social media platforms because of this, and they said no. And that's because the user experience is so good and there's no competition out there. These companies have monopolized the space in a sense. And So people might feel disgruntled or upset that the data is being used in this way, but not so much so that they're going to stop using the platforms. And this is kind of a real value added of Web3.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to touch on a really key issue and concept here of incentives. Like if you ask the question, why did we go from a Web 1 that was very open, distributed, where it was a focus on making everyone's computers interoperable so we could share things easily. One computer can talk to another. That was the kind of aim. And then Web 2, we went down this kind of content-driven, social media-driven route where now we're familiar with. We have advertising all over them. That's when we say if you're using something for free, then you are the product. You're paying for something that was free on the surface, but with your time and your attention, because you're being constantly advertised to, and all that data is being fed back into algorithms to try and advertise to you better. So this is touching on that idea of the incentives of Web 2 being very, very different from Web 1, and then Web 3 now I think is going back a little bit, and also providing new incentives to improve the problems of Web 2 through incentives and technology, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you think of like Web 1 as static, the user experience was very limited, but people had control because there wasn't much data being exchanged in a way. And then Web 2 was all about user experience, and that was at the detriment of privacy, control, and user power, really. And Web 3 hopes to kind of combine the benefits of both. You have the fantastic user experience that Web 2 currently provides, but users also have control of the data, ownership of the data, and with that they have the privacy of that data, the ability to choose who and when someone can see that data and know that it's not being passed between 100 people every time they submit a photo or a post. And a lot of people may not think they care about that. I mean, my mom might not care about her privacy, like owning data. What does that really mean to her? Like we said before, it's quite interesting that people at a high level care about this stuff, but when it comes to practical terms, then they're not going to change. And you keep talking about the economic incentives. I think we're going to see, and one of the main kind of, I guess, core focuses of Web3 is how we can incentivize people with this data ownership. It doesn't just mean that you own the data. It means that you can also commoditize your own data and potentially profit from people using your data. And you have the ability to do that. And I think that's going to be very exciting for us to see.
I think it's worth just name dropping a couple of the other problems that we'll probably talk about more in the series. But things that we see as problems, and we don't necessarily connect it to the broken incentives of Web 2. So things like trolling on Twitter, or bot farming, or click farming. These are largely because the platforms themselves are free. The fact that we have predominantly subscription-based services, and not all the companies that use them are actually starting to struggle because it's not necessarily the most attractive business model. People don't want to pay for that many subscriptions. There's something like 4 or 5 subscriptions maximum that most people are willing to pay for. And then there are all these other potential downstream effects that we're just starting to see. How it's affecting cultural thing, how it's affecting attention spans, people growing up in this new age, people are younger than us who are now struggling to hold their attention on things. We're seeing downstream effects of these that are potentially really damaging of how Web 2 has been set up. So I think all of these are problems that we'll end up touching on in the future. But it's good to bear in mind that Web 3 it's a big topic, and it's touching a lot of these different issues at the same time, I think.
Yeah, I think when people think of Web3, they tend to think of the buzzwords, crypto, art, NFTs, these like hype and speculation tools.
Blockchain.
Even that word has become a buzz. But I mean, it's so much more than just crypto and NFTs. And I think, we're seeing that more and more utility is coming from the Web3 world and the ecosystem. I've definitely noticed it in the last 2 to 3 years, especially. And that's very exciting. There's a multitude of kind of, use cases and applications that I'd never even thought about before that I've seen the last few years. And we'll talk about them a bit later in the show, but it's a really exciting time. And we talked earlier about the trust aspect as well. And I think that's super important. It's not that it's going to be a completely trustless economy in the future, but the trust is going to work in a different way. I mean, right now, when you're interacting in Web 2, you trust the third-party provider to kind of ensure that things happen. I think a really nice analogy that I heard before was that in a Web 2 model, it's the trust mechanism is similar to car lanes. You trust that the car won't veer off out of the lanes to hit you. Whereas in a Web3 model, it's far more trustless, not completely trustless, but far more trustless. You have visibility into the inner workings of consensus and the mechanisms. So you can compare it more to train tracks, where you see that the train is on train tracks. And with that visibility, you know with a high degree of certainty what is going to happen. And I quite like that analogy. I've maybe expanded it a bit too much, but
I like that as well. I really like that. I think, you've got this difference between trusting other people in the system, trusting the drivers of the cars, and trusting the actual infrastructure. So I can see, the protocol that I trust in that case is that the mechanics of a train sticking to its rails. That's much more trustworthy than maybe some drug person driving their car. You can see how that's more appealing as an idea.
I'm glad you like that. I tried to use that with my mum, and she had no idea. She was like, that didn't help at all. She was like, I trust that the train driver won't hit me as well. I'm like, yeah, I suppose.
I guess maybe one final point on Web 2 as well is that we're now seeing the proliferation of lots of new AI tools and models that are being trained on that data, that very data that we as users have supplied and essentially given up in return for using social media. That's now been used to train these AI agents that are now answering all our questions. So maybe it's good to test that out and see how good they are based on what's happening on the internet. So I know you've teed up ChatGPT to give us maybe a more concise, more direct to the point definition of Web3. So do you want to maybe take us through what ChatGPT thinks?
Yeah, so ChatGPT defines Web3 as, in one sentence, as a decentralized, user-centric evolution of the internet that empowers individuals with greater control, privacy, and ownership of their data and digital assets through blockchain technology and peer-to-peer interactions. Now, that is nice. That is very nice.
It's pretty impossible to keep up. I don't know how well you think you manage with everything, but again, how can you define something when it's changing every day as well?
Exactly. And I think to kind of relate to the Web 1 definition, we had this kind of hype and speculation boom where everyone was kind of investing. There were schemes everywhere to kind of get in on the .com era. And then there was this crash. And I think we've seen some of that so far, where there's this hype around, most people, when they think of Web3, they think around crypto, they think around art, NFTs. They're the two biggest terms that we always see in this ecosystem. And most of that is speculative. Most of that, doesn't provide utility, doesn't provide value to end users. It's just people with money who want to gamble effectively. And that's quite frustrating, I think, especially for maybe people in our field where we're trying to build things that help people, that add value, that, create value. And most people, when you think of Web3, they have the connotations of crypto and NFTs.
Well, that's an interesting segue, I think, because it's an elephant in the room. We introduce ourselves as kind of researchers and working in tech in blockchain specifically, and we haven't really mentioned it very much in Web3 yet. So I don't know what's the connection that's brought us here at the to doing this podcast from a blockchain background. What's the connection with Web3 for you?
Well, I think the technology in principle, it's both the technology and principles of blockchain are the fundamental principles of Web3. It's all about, distribution and trust distribution and kind of trust in the technology. And there are obviously more elements to Web3. We could talk about IPFS and distributed storage systems and all this kind of stuff, but it's blockchain is at the core. And it's all about, creating a level playing field using this technology and not having these kind of centralized repositories, the Facebooks of the world that act as the authority of data, basically. What are your thoughts on that, Jack?
Yeah, I agree. I would kind of look at the history of of how blockchain has become, I would say probably a household name. I'd say most people actually know about blockchain, which is weird because when I first started working in this industry, no one did. It was a very strange thing. People used to say, do you work for the blockchain? It's like not exactly. So if you kind of look at where the term Web3 came from, I think most people now attribute it to Gavin Wood, who was one of the kind of core founding members of Ethereum, and one of the minds behind that now has kind of moved on to Polkadot. So Ethereum, Polkadot, two of the leading blockchains, two of the largest by market cap, by usage, and everything like this. And it's no mistake that blockchain has been evolving at a very similar time as Web3, because the crossover of technologies that are used to make blockchain work are very similar, and all the technologies that are being used in Web3, which we'll kind of get onto in later episodes, I think, because there's so much to talk about. But the thing to know is that they're almost being kind of tested on blockchains. They're being bedded and developed and put into practice on blockchains first, a lot of the time for quite niche applications, quite a small set of people who are thinking, well, this would be a cool thing to do. How do we achieve this? They look at these tools like, cryptography is one of these fields that's allowing lots of things to happen. And that's always being used first by blockchain. I mean, if you look at why do we even talk about blockchain? Where did that come from? So Bitcoin is what started really everyone talking about blockchain. From 2008, that is when it came into the public consciousness. And when Bitcoin came out, it was all about this idea of, for payments specifically, how do we remove intermediaries that aren't required? So how do we reduce the cost of transacting by minimizing how much trust, as you say, we have on different parties in the system? And I really see Web3 as a logical evolution of that idea, a generalization of that to not just payments and kind of financial systems, but to the internet overall, because the same problems and solutions can apply. That's probably what I've started to identify. So that's why I think they're so kind of intrinsically linked now at this point.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important. I know that we were talking earlier about, I mean, in that original, the Bitcoin paper, there was a talk about, peer-to-peer exchange. And I think, one of the premises of that is own your own data. And we've talked a little bit about that. But what does that actually mean? Like, what does own your own data mean? I don't think many people before the last 5-6 years, especially, well, definitely not I, thought that you could own your own data. I wouldn't even know why I would want to own my own data, and you don't really think about Facebook.
But even that brings a question of, what does it mean to own my data? Don't I own my data?
Exactly. And you think like, okay, I own my data, like Facebook maybe hold it on my behalf. And then there was all these like leaks and scandals we've seen about how they're using that data. It really did bring it into the forefront of a lot of people's minds. Like, what is it to own your own data? And I think there has been a shift in mindsets, and now people feel that they should be empowered in this space. And it's not a big ask to say, I want privacy. I want to choose who can see my data. I should own my data on my device. And when I feel I would need to use it, then I can selectively disclose that to someone. And I think that's a massive paradigm shift. And like I said before, maybe there's a lot of people that don't understand the value in that. But more and more, I think, it's not just the tech savvies that are seeing the value in that, but also like the governments are seeing the value in that. There's all this stuff around GDPR compliance, and people do have a right to privacy. And we're seeing that there's a big kind of emphasis on this lately. And I think, Web3 is going to be, I mean, it's such a wide term, but one of the main aspects of Web3 is going to be data ownership. And we'll probably talk about it a lot more in future episodes about how you can actually enable that data ownership. But it is a core concept. I think people are starting to wake up to that.
Yeah, well, none more so. So, Dan, we mentioned the history repeating itself a little bit. There are similarities with Web3 as there were with Web 1. So this idea of things being more distributed, more decentralized, kind of interoperable standards rather than silos in companies. And for me, one of the biggest confirmation moments was when I started seeing Tim Berners-Lee himself, talking about this issue. So if you
might want to explain who that is, Jack.
Well, very good point. So again, if I was talking to your mum, I would say,
why are you talking to my mum so much?
You brought her into this. So Tim Berners-Lee is widely regarded as the kind of founding father of the internet, of Web 1. So he was kind of the first person to conceptualize this data sharing paradigm. How do we spread information using computers? That was the idea, right? And then he envisioned it as this kind of, I would say, slightly utopian, but something different to what Web 2 became. And he seems very, very, very dissatisfied with what Web 2 is, and is now making great efforts to change that with exactly what you're talking about there with data sharing and ownership. So it's super interesting.
I mean, yeah, I don't know that much about him. Like, what's he been saying specifically?
I have looked up quotes before. I have used quotes of his in kind of in presentations and things, because obviously I highly regard him. I'm his number one fan in many ways. But he's he's building a company to do just this. He's building a company to allow users to take full control of their data. So to permission exactly who sees which data when and for what reasons, and it's kind of a concept of pod. So I would keep my data in a little pod over here. So yeah, I can't produce any. Well, I'll research one for next time.
I've not heard the term pod before, but I think that relates.
It's a pod. It's our first pod on the pod. So
wow, nice. I like that. It's gonna be our catch line. I think there's a point there that you spoke about earlier. Well, it kind of made me think about it because you said the word pod. Interoperability. And how that relates, that's a big part of Web3 and the Web3 agenda. So right now we have these big players like Google, Facebook, Twitter, who are these central kind of bastions and gatekeepers for what's done and how people interact on their kind of applications. And that makes interoperability quite hard. I have to sign up with each of these different websites every single time. I have to KYC to use these different websites every time.
Yeah, that's the switching cost idea, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so difficult to move from one. You can't. How do you? I don't even know how to port all my data across to a new platform.
Exactly. You personalize, you have a fan base, likes and subscribers in one area. You want to get that stuff across as well. You don't want to start again when you move to a new social media platform, for example. So that's where this term interoperability came from. It's all about being able to take your profile, your experiences, the data that's kind of relevant to you from one platform to the next. And there's probably a lot of resistance from the big players in Silicon Valley to do this because they want to make it sticky. Facebook doesn't want you to be able to move to Twitter. Why would they?
That's back to the incentives. Exactly right. It's in their best interest. I think the term is called platform lock-in. Right. It's in their best interest to lock you in to their platform because that's how they can monetize you as the product. You can be a source of data for them. You can be a consumer of advertising.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not in their interest to make things interoperable. And again, Web 1 was all about this idea of interoperability. It was all about how can we make everyone on the in the world able to easily share information. That was the key goal. So that's like the definition of interoperability. How do we just share information frictionlessly? And then Web 2 kind of took it the opposite way.
And we're seeing this as a big project that's come out now, Blue Sky by Jack Dorsey, where he's moved away from the vision of Web 2, you are the product. Web 3, the content is the product, and it's all about creating kind of a layer that multiple social media platforms can build on top of. And it's all around user centricity. Then you have the ability to just move your data, your information, who kind of hold your data as well, get that portability to transfer between different applications. One day I don't like what Twitter's doing. I'm going to move to Facebook. Maybe their search algorithm's slightly better. It's more relevant to me, but I don't want to have to sign up again. I want to maintain all the data across the two, and I get that portability. The focus with Web3 is all around user centricity, and that's a massive aspect of that.
So I think that's a key point, right? And we've been talking pretty abstractly. We've talked about problems in a bit more detail, but not so much what are the actual use cases of this, right? So, what would be your number one use case right now? What's the thing that excites you most that you could do in Web3?
Oh, that's a big one. So I mean, it's not the most exciting one, but if I was talking to my mum, which we're both having lots of conversations with my mum recently.
We should get her on as our first guest. Sure.
God, she wouldn't even be able to use the laptop. She can't even use Web 2. So yeah, the big one for me and the most kind of easily explainable one is certificates. And I love to use the university certificate kind of exchange kind of example, but this could apply to.
What is a certificate? What's the definition, just for anyone who doesn't know?
It's a reference to some kind of credential, I guess, like a kind of. So the perfect example I'd give is a university certificate. I have a degree that says I did pretty okay at an okay university in engineering, basically. When I go for an interview and I say, I've got a degree from X university in Y field, how do they verify that? Right now,
Yeah.
it's so hard. Like there's millions of people with degrees. It's really difficult and quite tedious and time consuming for them to manually verify that I am Alec Burns and this certificate applies to me and is valid. What do? There's no digital process really. Like the actual process is typically to ring up the university and manually verify that. And think on the scale of like all the people around the world with credentials as far ranging from you're a doctor, you're a therapist, you're an engineer, you're a mechanic. Like there's
you say doctor, that makes me think of how do you verify anything to do with your medical history, for example? And I know it's particularly difficult to just get a complete set of your records to transfer them from one place to another, because I think a lot of this kind of verification aspect doesn't exist, or the systems to again, maybe that's an interoperability angle as well, right? You've got different systems at play, but I think what you're saying applies to so many things and so many critical things, that aren't just certificates that people are lying on their CVs. It's like really bad stuff.
Very relevant to us, basically. That's why I try and use that example. But it's also insurers. Like, how do you get a mortgage? Like, you've got all this data. How do you verify data? I think the certificate's a nice example because it's something that everyone has this kind of it's tangible. It's a very tangible thing. It's like a verification that's issued by some kind of trusted party. But how do I verify it efficiently? And that's a really, really good example of how the Web3 model comes into place. Like, I want to own that certificate. I don't want anyone to see that certificate unless I want them to see that certificate. Like, it could be quite private for me for whatever reason. I want to own that on my mobile device. But if I go to a job application or an interview and I want to selectively disclose that to them to prove that I can do what I say I can do, they should be able to verify that instantly.
Well, yeah, I think you touched on two words there that kind of stuck out, right? The big concepts that go with all this. And
I often do that.
You said efficiency, which I think is often the source of a lot of these problems, right? Why is it difficult to move my medical records when I leave uni and I get that certificate? Why is it so difficult to move back to my home GP from the one I had at university? It's because the inefficiency involved in doing that. A lot of paper-based systems, a lot of documents. Efficiency is often one of the ways I would describe the benefit, the value proposition of Web3. It can provide much more efficient ways of doing things. Then you also mentioned privacy, right, which is a huge topic. But again, all those technologies that we will kind of come on to in the future talking about, a lot of them are focused on privacy. This idea of just only you that I allow to see my data can see it. And I know that for a fact. I know, you think about how far has your CV traveled, the CV that you may have lied about this fictitious degree on. How far does that... Well, this is the thing. Who knows where it's circulating once you pass that on to someone, right? To a recruiter, for example. Who knows? How do we even track that kind of information? That is a big thing that, I think is a worry for a lot of people when they apply for jobs. Is, will anyone know that this is getting passed on? And
it comes back to the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Like, if people knew how their data was being used, like, they wouldn't be okay with it, I think. And the thing is, we don't have that transparency. We don't have that provenance. I think that's a big word that's used often. We can't see what the chain is, where it's being sent to. You think that Facebook just store it on some server and it disappears forever and it's just locked up unless you want to use it. But realistically, like, that is the commodity. That is mostly, apart from advertising, how they're making money sometimes. And we have to be aware of that. And I think that's one of the main kind of aims of Web3 is to get this privacy and control of data, so know where your data is being used. And I think a big exciting thing in my mind, and this makes it very tangible, data ownership, whatever. Some people don't even care about privacy. But as soon as you think about the monetary aspect as well, like right now, the big players in Web2, they are collecting the money for your data. Imagine a world where you get money for your own data. They have to request that they use your data for, I don't know, a survey, or they sell it to a market or whatever. And you get rewarded for that. You're incentivized.
That's the key, right? I don't think it's that people, personally, I don't think it's that people are uncomfortable with giving the data or producing the data. We are quite happy with most people are quite happy with how things work, because there isn't a better way at the minute on social media. And I often wonder, I expect if we do move to a Web3 world, we will probably end up with most people doing exactly what they do now. They'll just earn more from it. They'll earn something from it, for starters, and be able to profit more directly than having to, most people who are on social media, most users of social media, so your influencers, your TikTok stars, the people who profit from it, you see they become advertisers themselves. It's the only business model in town in Web2, and that's kind of the thing that I think is disrupting. But yeah, I think
you on TikTok, Jack, or
I'm not yet, unfortunately. I need to retain some modicum of my attention span, so I'm not on there yet.
if this podcast goes well, I'm sure you'll be all over TikTok and you'll be monetizing it left, right, and center. So I gave you my use case certificates. Do you have a big, exciting use case of Web3?
Yes. So I think we were starting to touch on that, but not explicitly. So let me make it explicit. I think micropayments and the huge space of possibilities that they open up are massive. I think that for me, that's the most exciting value proposition in Web3. So what do I mean by micropayments? I mean doing payments that are small, micro, so are below the amount that you can do in the existing world, in the Web2 world, or in the physical world as well. And again, that's kind of due to efficiencies. The cost of doing payments, the cost of someone accepting your payment is actually so high enough that you can't send, say, 1 penny or less than a penny. So the kind of
MasterCard and Visa, like they're charging like quite high rates, basically. So it makes small fee, like small money's infeasible.
And do you know anyone who owns a small business?
Is this like you're engaging with the crowd
This is me asking you if you know the price of a pint of milk. No.
I do know someone with a small business, yes. And then can you tell me what my card is?
No. So the reason I ask is I know a few, and it was only through them and relatively recently that I kind of realized how expensive it is to accept payments, and how lots of payments are virtually not worth accepting. And that's why if you go into a corner shop or something, you have these minimum spends, because below a certain threshold, your merchant, who's accepting the payment, the person in the shop will be effectively losing money, or it won't be feasible. And that's the source of this micropayments issue. So before this Web3 paradigm came along, we didn't really have a good way of doing that. Then Bitcoin and blockchain came along and gave us a practical, credible way of doing micropayments. So what does that mean in practice? What does it mean I can actually do? Why do I want to spend a penny? Am I just going to go around all the sweet shops buying penny sweets one at a time?
Penny sweets? What era are you from that you refer to things as penny sweets?
Yeah, I'm showing my age now. For me, it's couched in the internet specifically. So the story I always go back to when I'm talking about micropayments is there was an article, I don't remember which newspaper it was in. It was around 2019. So all the machinations of Brexit was going on. I think there was a particularly spicy headline in a newspaper that I was really interested in reading. I thought, okay, I'm going to read this. And I clicked on it, and it was a subscription-only newspaper. So I would have had to sign up for a subscription to read it. And otherwise, it was blocked. And I thought, oh, okay, well, this looks really interesting. I want to be, well informed. So I'm gonna sign up. And I signed up for the free trial. Obviously, I read the article. Probably wasn't as interesting as I thought it was, and I've forgotten it all since. And after that free trial, I ended up being locked in to a subscription that I went at long pains to get out of. So it took me a long time to actually, you have to get on the phone. You can't just do it online because they want to, again, this isn't the same idea of
sticky
lock-in.
Sticky platforms. Yeah, I get that.
Exactly. So it took a long time to actually get unsubscribed. And all I could help thinking is, I wish I could have just paid 10p to read that article. Like, why would that not have been better? Because a lot of subscription services in general will let you unsubscribe easily, right? They're not actually quite as bad as that example.
I think they're liable to now, right? It's like a legal thing where you have to
get probably is now,
very easily because of you, maybe you.
That court case, But you think of how many times have you been deterred from doing something because you faced a paywall, right? And paying £10 a month was not what you were prepared to do. But paying 10p to read the article might well have been and there's this whole new business model and revenue model there that maybe that can make up for subscriptions. Like the newspaper industry is really struggling. That's why I kind of mention it. And I certainly think something like media shifting to micropayments and being able to just pay for an article, read what you like, and that's it. And that's, again, it's more efficient. I'm just paying for what I use. I'm paying for what I read, and that's something that really excites me as a kind of practical thing.
Yeah, and I guess in the same kind of area as well, you could imagine, you pay for a movie. I think I've heard this example before. Why pay £5 for the whole movie if after 5 minutes you realize it's a terrible movie? Imagine paying a penny per minute or something like this, and then that's a whole new revenue generation model. It's quite exciting. This could apply to tutoring. It could apply to any kind of human interaction where you want to pay per time constraint rather than pay for the entire service. The exact same things we were talking about.
Yeah, and again, to keep coming back to incentives, I think not only is the business model new, but I think this could have profound changes for how businesses operate, how they compete. So if you're paying per second for something, I can imagine that incentivizing quality content production, right?
Definitely,
so you need to entice someone to not only watch to get the subscription and then leave after, but to get from the first 10 minutes of the video or the film to the 90th minute of the film. You don't want it to be this kind of clickbait. Clickbait is a big problem on YouTube and things. So you want to incentivize people.
Clickbait?
What's that?
What's clickbait?
Clickbait. You actually don't know clickbait?
No, I don't think so.
Ah, okay. So this is the idea of when you will typically for videos, but it happens. I mean, a lot of headlines in news are also clickbait as well. It's kind of probably the OG clickbait is a news headline. It's when you get a thumbnail that is particularly jazzy, particularly bombastic with,
Can you give me an example?
Like The Mandalorian episode 7 was the worst thing I've ever seen. And then, you go into the video and the actual opinion is much, much more tempered than that. And it's just a way of hooking you, basically.
Right.
And
I thought Mandalorian was good.
Well, this week's is better. But yeah, and again, it always comes back to these incentives, because why do we get clickbait? It's because content creators are all competing in this big, opaque algorithm for views, for eyeballs. And the best way to feed that is clickbait. So they're having to do it because that's the business model. That's how you stay afloat as a creator on things like YouTube and other platforms. So
yeah, I get
that. I would be excited for how it changes that.
So Emma from the studio has just sent us an exciting fact about Web3 that I'm going to read now. Thank you, Emma. So more than 73 million gamers use the Web3 based Fortnite and Roblox already. And that is a very exciting use case as well. I am a big gamer, and there's nothing better than user-generated content. And I think one of the community-generated content, actually, making maps, making new games, extending what the core concept of a game is within the community. And because they know it best, they're the most passionate about it. That they can take that and really run with it and create things that have a lot of value. And I think you imagine people being rewarded and having ownership of the things they create, and having this incentive model for the community to then keep propagating more generated content. I think that's a really exciting. I think gaming is going to benefit from the Web3 model, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing I think micropayments lends itself to, is this gamification idea in general, which applies in games and these kind of. We're also touching on another topic here, which I'm hesitant to mention, like this whole metaverse idea.
We'll that is definitely for another episode.
Let's keep that in a box.
We can't do that. So yeah, I think we have covered a lot of things here, maybe some ambiguously, some quite specifically, but I think that kind of wraps up at a very high level what we think Web3 is.
I think that should give you a suitable idea of how much we have to learn about Web3 going forward.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Untangling Web3, produced by Emma Camilleri.
Don't forget to send us your thoughts, questions, and comments on social media, and be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast provider to catch the next episode. See you next time to untangle a little bit more of Web3.
The views we express here are our own and do not reflect the views of our employers.